All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Contract Analysis and Review Now and Into the Future webinar presented by RICO Canada in partnership with Heretik. So just a couple of housekeeping items today. The webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all participants after it's done. You can submit your questions anytime. You should have a Q&A box that is available to you in the webinar interface. We'll do a Q&A walkthrough at the end. And finally, we will follow up via email to questions that we don't have time to cover today. So please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Sean Lynch. I'm the Director of Legal and Compliance Solutions for RICO Canada. I oversee the contract analysis portfolio, which is part of what we'll be talking about today. I'm also involved in new and emerging technologies with RICO Canada. I am a lawyer. I practiced briefly before working in the e-discovery space, which I've been doing for the last 10 years. And I've done everything from document review through to project management and now overseeing a larger offering at RICO. And I'd also like to introduce Michael Gilbert, who is the Director of Strategy and Business Development with Heretik. And Michael can give an introduction of himself now as well.
Hey, thanks, Sean. Hi, everybody. Michael Gildner here. As Sean mentioned, I am the Director of Strategy and Business Development at Heretik. I've been in this role for a little over a year, and my background is primarily in financial services and specifically in consulting, focusing on mergers and acquisition related projects and opportunities. Really excited to be here today in partnership with RICO to showcase how the Heretik technology is helping tackle contract opportunities. So with that, Sean, I'll hand it back over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Michael. So to start out the webinar, and we're going to have a few of these as we work through the material together today, we have a question for you. So we'd like to know, what are you and your company most concerned about at the moment? So force majeure, contract litigation readiness, bankruptcy and insolvency, and business continuity. So if you could vote now on your screen, and we'll give everyone a few minutes to get their vote in, and then we can skip to the results and see kind of what everyone's feeling at the moment amidst the COVID crisis. Okay, we've got about 36 responses thus far. I'll give it another couple of seconds, see if anyone else would like to chime in. Okay, so I'm just going to close the poll now, and we can move on to the results here. So I think it's great that the concerns of bankruptcy and insolvency are quite low, so that's wonderful to see. Business continuity, a resounding winner at 54%. That's great. We're going to be talking about business continuity insurance, as well as moving your contractual relationships forward as we move through this crisis at the moment, and looking towards the future into how technologies that we currently have can assist you in the present and assist you even more as we work through this and get into what is likely going to be the new world of work and the new contractual relationships you'll start having with both your vendors, suppliers, et cetera. Okay, so an outline of what we're going to be touching on today. first and foremost, we're going to touch on some immediate concerns. We're going to move from there to the importance of centralizing agreements, why it's important, and how technologies like Heretik and services by Rico can assist with that. We're going to talk about empowering decision-making, risk adversity, assessing risk, etc. From there, we're going to go into a demonstration provided by Michael that is a really great way of understanding the way the technology can work with you and assist you in making better decisions and getting information all in one place that you can access essentially at the click of a button. We're going to be using, or rather I should say Michael is going to be using an example around force majeure within the Heretik demonstration environment. Even though force majeure wasn't particularly high on the poll, it'll give you a really good sense of the power of Heretik as a tool. We'll touch on litigation readiness through for counsel that's on the phone, understanding that there is going to be a certain amount of litigation that is going to come out of our current experience, particularly around contractual relationships, around force majeure, termination, inability to perform, etc. And from there, we're going to move into contracting into the future. And again, how tools like Heretik and services like those provided by Rico can assist in developing and supporting you as you move into essentially the new way of contracting and the way those relationships are likely going to change. So first and foremost, immediate concerns. Of course, we're all concerned about force majeure. That was likely an issue that you were all facing probably about 6 weeks ago. And judging from the results of the poll, that's borne out to be true at the moment. Force majeure is something that we all contemplated before, and now we're trying to find a way to work through everything. And again, to business continuity and business interruption insurance. The continuity piece, of course, being from a contractual perspective, what are my risks? What are my liabilities? What happens if I terminate the contract now, if I'm unable to fulfill that contract? Does a force majeure clause exist that allows me to mitigate some of the consequences of not being able to perform or by my vendor's inability to perform? And then, of course, bankruptcy and insolvency. As I said, I was really glad that this was so low on the poll. That's a great result coming out of Canada. I am in the U.S. at the moment, and I can certainly tell you it is a very different experience down here. So great to see that bankruptcy and insolvency really isn't on anyone's mind, that it's really about continuing business relationships. So we probably won't spend very much time talking about bankruptcy and insolvency, and we'll focus more then on business continuity, managing your contracts in real time, and getting a better understanding in one location what your contractual relationships are and what the limitations might be, liabilities, risks, etc. So we have another poll for you here, and this is something that I'm particularly interested in, so I'd really appreciate it if everyone on the call or on the webinar can answer. So how does your company currently organize its contracts? Are they centralized and all electronic, so there's either a scanned version of it, or you created and signed the document electronically so you don't have any paper? Is it centralized in one location, but it's a mix of paper and electronic? Is it not centralized, so that meaning that it's diffuse, different offices for your corporation have boxes of contracts in one location in Alberta and another box of contracts in Ontario? Or essentially it's the Wild West and everyone maintains their contracts in different ways, depends on which salesperson is handling a certain file. They might organize it one way, different salesperson organizes it another way, and the contracts themselves and whatever modifications might have been done, no one really knows what's there. So that's kind of what I mean by the Wild West. And we find that as you're all voting and working through this, we find that with a lot of places that do have diffuse sales teams. So if you think of Alberta, Saskatchewan, where there are a lot of smaller offices with larger corporations, a lot of the time the contracts that exist are maintained by the individual office. They're not centralized in a headquarters in any way, and oftentimes they're not electronic. They're paper documents that are just signed. So if that's the situation, you're certainly not alone. So feel free to vote honestly, and we can kind of focus on where we're all going. So we have about 35 responses right now. I'll give it another 30 seconds or so just so everyone can get their opinion in. Okay, so let's take a look at the results. Okay, interesting. So kind of an even split between centralized paper and electronic and not centralized paper and electronic. I realize that one of them says paper and electron. Sorry about that. That's my fault. So very interesting. Centralized all electronic, it's not surprising that that number is so low. And there are a couple of reasons for that, which we're going to touch on in the next slide. But it's really interesting that the split is centralized, not centralized, and a mix of paper. And I feel you, Wild West people, 16% of you, where it's just kind of all over the place. And as I said, you're not alone. And that's simply because of the standard practice that a lot of companies have and how they empower their sales teams and their representatives to deliver services to clients and what those contractual relationships look like. So this is great, and we can have a good conversation about this and the next slide, which is why centralizing contracts is valuable. So most of the time what you'll find, even in instances where you have a centralized electronic repository where all of your contracts go, there tends to be inconsistent use of that database. So you might have some individuals who are always logging their contracts in, ensuring that the right terms, the clauses, start dates, end dates, all of that information is properly extracted and put into a centralized location. But a lot of the time, the individuals responsible for that don't necessarily do it all the time. And that's something we've heard from our clients is that, yes, we have a database, but nobody really uses it because they don't want to. It might be cumbersome. It might be overly burdensome. It might not work particularly well. There are lots of different reasons, but sometimes that is a barrier to adoption of a centralized resource, like Heretik, for example, because there can be some cumbersomeness that comes along with that. One of the reasons why centralizing is important is because it limits multiple parties modifying contracts as needed. If you have a centralized location where your contracts both live when they're completed and executed, and also serves as a location where an individual sales representative, et cetera, can pull a contract out of, it makes it much easier to control what terms are going out of your business and what your sales reps, et cetera, are agreeing to. Again, limiting multiple versions of the same agreement, same sort of idea that you don't want to have the same agreement that has been modified many, many different ways. And to the Wild West individuals on the call, you might have 50 or 100 different versions of the same contract that's out there. Your base contract is the same. So legal, finance management, they know what the base looks like, but they have no idea what modifications might have been done to that base document. And not knowing that is very troubling for a lot of corporate legal departments. One, because they don't know, and two, without a centralized resource, it's very difficult for them to get that information when they need it. So for example, in the current crisis, being able to very quickly and effectively see where your contracts are, how many there are, what the force majeure clauses are, what the termination clauses are, and have those all in one central location, it makes it much easier to assess what the corporation's risk is at the moment. And for the law firms that are on the line as well, using a tool like this or encouraging your clients to either centralize their contracts with you for the purposes of managing them through a tool like Heretik, or for the purposes of just managing them internally, it makes it much easier for external counsel to provide opinions when the contracts are all in one location, of course. And as we get into the demonstration around Heretik, which we'll get there in just a few more minutes, you'll see the power of the tool and its ability to extract clauses and put them into a structured, essentially a structured display that allows you to see all of the types of clauses you have, whether or not the provision is automatically active or not, et cetera. So again, you'd be able to get a very quick look at what your risks and liabilities are in a certain crisis like we have right now. So what our goal is when it comes to providing the contract analysis and review service through WeGo is empowering decision making. Knowledge is always is power. The more you know about your contracts, the more access you have to them, the more you're going to be able to make a well-informed, practical, effective decision. Without fully understanding your contractual obligations and risks, it's impossible to steer a corporation in a difficult time. And for those who might have, a centralized resource or a non-centralized resource, where you have documents that are electronic and paper, The electronic ones might be easy to go through. You might be able to run some searches, find what you're looking for, or if you do have an in-house tool where you're managing all of your contracts and you're using it well, you have that ability already. But in those instances where you have a split between paper and electronic, or just no electronic at all, finding all of those contracts, one, is time-consuming and cumbersome, and you might not find everything. Because again, you might have contracts that are separated across diffuse offices around Canada. Using Heretik coupled with RICO's review service, you have powerful reporting right at your fingertips, and you'll see what that looks like when Michael gets into his demonstration next. The idea is to be able to pull all of that information, as I said, into one location that's centralized, to allow corporate legal, finance, CEOs, CFOs, etc., to empower them to make decisions that are effective, that are both cost-effective, timely, and protect the interests of the corporation as best as possible. So bearing all of that in mind, and kind of this, what we're hoping to do here, now we want to show you what the tool looks like and how RICO works with Heretik to build out a workflow and process that allows you to quickly and effectively identify these contracts. And for the purposes of the review service provided by RICO, this is work that you don't need to do, that the law firm doesn't need to do, that external counsel doesn't need to do, that your corporate legal department, who's probably very strained right now, doesn't need to do. Utilizing the tool as well as the other technology services provided by RICO, we can take all of your contracts, paper or otherwise, centralize them into one location, and provide the reporting that Michael is going to demonstrate now. So with that, I'm going to turn that over to Michael so we can get the Heretik demo so you can see the power of this tool. So Michael, take it away. Thanks.
Yep, thank you, Sean. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. And for everybody on the demo here, we're taking on the high risk, maybe low reward of doing a live demo from our remote working lifestyles now to showcase the power of the technology. And as Sean very well put it, Heretik is the technology that's enabling RICO's people and process to ultimately structure contract data for your firms in order to be able to make informed decisions. And starting out, if you're familiar with relativity, at Heretik, we're a lightweight application built on top of relativity, and I'm going to be stepping through a force majeure demo. Since I do not have a background in the legal industry, about 6 months ago, I wasn't even familiar with what force majeure is. So I like to start very high level and explain. For this demo, we'll be reviewing the clause typically dropped into supply agreements that is written in case there's an event such as a terrorist attack, an earthquake, a pandemic that causes a breach of obligations, and what needs to be done in instances that a breach is being happened related to a contract. And so with that, when you first put contracts into Heretik, we start by applying machine learning models to those documents. So the technology goes into those documents and looks at the contract title and pulls that out verbatim from the document. Our machine learning models will then take that and normalize it onto the contract types. We're trained on over 42 different contract types. So we can provide a report of the more common contract documents that we're identifying. So in this example, there's 11 different agreements that we've classified across 5 different types, and it quickly shows you what are the classification of the documents that our machine learning models have analyzed. Additionally, when we're first running our analysis on the documents, we pull out the different sections. So this first contract had 20 different sections, and you can see across these 11 contracts, we're pulling out the more common sections that we're finding, like force majeure, confidentiality, and our technology is trained on over 330 different sections. And so I mentioned my background is in mergers and acquisitions. When I was ever managing a deal room as part of an acquisition, there could be hundreds or thousands of documents that were being loaded into that deal room, and it would take potentially weeks of work in order to just get the arms around the number of documents that were loaded into this room. And what we have here is really within hours classifying the scope and breaking those documents up into different sections. And so it can take potentially weeks of work and take that down to a matter of hours in order to get started and honed in on the scope. Now that we've got these documents broken up within relativity, we're able to take advantage of the platform, and we're able to filter down onto confidentiality sections. We can take those sections and load them into our compare feature and run a side-by-side textual-based comparison where 10 out of 10 we're getting exact matches. You can review this in our viewer. You can see the track changes. You can see when we've got a lot of differences between the documents. We've heard the example of if you have gold standard language outside of relativity that you want to load into this compare interface, you can then take some language outside of the compare and load it in with that simple import feature. We also have the ability to export this information to Word, Excel, or Save Search back into relativity. So I'll quickly show what that looks like pulling it out into Word. And so this is a quick way to do these side-by-side textual-based comparisons. We've worked with Rico and doing compares not only on individual sections, but you can compare entire contracts on a section by section where you can map them to the appropriate sections. And you also can compare individual fields that you're extracting from Heretik. And so high level starting out, that was the classification, the segmentation, and then the compare. Now let me get into the force majeure components to this in a little more detail. We've leveraged relativity to set up different reports and widgets based on the data that's being extracted from Heretik. And what you can see here is you can hone in on just the contracts that have force majeure clauses. You can identify which party is liable in a force majeure section, if notice is required, the type of notice, the days that are required to give notice, the classification of force majeure as it's related and written in the contract, and the RICO team with the subject matter experts related to reviewing these documents, you can give a classification on high, medium, or low level of risk. So getting into the Heretik viewer, kind of starting off from left to right, you've got the classification of the document, you've got the segmentation, where you can come down to these clauses and you can find force majeure. You also can collapse this information to look at the data points, which is Heretik extraction, leveraging regular expressions to auto-populate fields. So if I'm looking for the trigger event to see if it's an act of God or a flood, etc., that would trigger the force majeure clause, we can take that information and send it directly to a field to auto-populate that information. Similarly, we can look for things like what notification is required, is it written notice, how many days notice is required, is it as soon as possible or within X number of days of an event happening. If it is written notice, we can look for language like the address, which we may be finding in another area of the contract. So what we've seen with working with RICO is depending upon the number of fields that need to be extracted, we're either doing a manual review to highlight and populate that information, or we're leveraging Heretik extraction to auto-populate that information. When we've done comparisons on reviewing contracts with PDFs and Excel files to create structured data versus manually reviewing in the Heretik interface, we're getting a 3 to 5 time savings on the amount of time that it takes to do a review. So if it took an hour, we're seeing that get down to 20 minutes or less. But when we have regular expressions to auto-populate fields, if we're able to get 60 to 70% of those with regular expressions, that's where we see the time savings really take off and increase above that 5x mark. A couple other things to show in the Heretik viewer here is we've got search bars to do kind of a control F across, where we can find things like assign 7 times in the contract. But we also have a regular expression library where the assignment clause, we look for language like will be assigned, will be assignable, 15 different variations of this. And you can take that information, put it into our search bar, turn this into a regular expression search, and hit on the one instance of may assign in the contract. You also can tweak the regular expression here. And this is a way of testing to make sure the regular expressions are not only hitting on this one contract in the viewer, but you can bounce to other contracts in this workspace to make sure that this information is working for you as well. A couple different views to work on within here. You can toggle on the thumbnails. You can go to the extracted text for the manual review. You can view in relativity. And you also can go into our edit section mode. So if our out-of-the-box machine learning models are not segmenting a contract with subclauses or perhaps definitions of the definition section like you wanted segmented, the RICO team can work on those and manually segment them, and the product is active learning and essentially taking that manual work and creating a new machine learning model that can be applied on future documents or that existing project for additional documents in that set in order to segment the contract in the preferable way in order to essentially allow you to get the information that you're looking to as quickly as possible. So now that kind of wrapping up on the viewer here, another layout that we have is extracting data points like the client parties, their addresses, and we've got a tool that we've built called document assembly. And so in the force majeure workflow, what we've seen is often written notice is required in the event of sending something like this template that says, as a result of coronavirus, I'm sending this written notice, but there's a lot of fields or really tokens that we've put in here with these brackets that you want to have auto-populated, so you could create this written notice at scale for hundreds or thousands of contracts that you have in place to really be able to do this in a more efficient manner than manually creating every written notice that's required. So getting back to Heretik here, and the document assembly component to this, there's a workflow here of loading the template, creating model, profile, and set that the RICO team takes care of for you. And once you have isolated your documents of which ones are written notice ready, you run them through the document analysis set. This document is then created at scale where you can see parties, addresses have all been auto-populated into the sections. The fields are mapping to tokens. And then you can then take this written notice and essentially send it to your clients a lot more efficiently than you would without being able to create these at scale. For those familiar with relativity, you can manage the end-to-end workflow within relativity with the RICO team highlighting what level of risk the force majeure clause provides, if written notice is required, and then tracking that the obligation is something that needs to be done or has already been met. And so you can kind of see this very specifically for the force majeure workflow, but if you think about other use cases, I saw business continuity being one that was selected a lot in the poll with insurance policies. It's essentially the same steps and the same capabilities that the tool makes available to you. And there's often some type of notice or deliverable that's being extracted from the data that's being reviewed and created as a structured database, like Sean was talking about, that ultimately is very helpful for the team to make informed decisions, but even having the output of an individual deliverable for a contract or an agreement makes things a lot more efficient as well. And so that is really helping, I think, in this current environment on creating written notices to be able to send and reactive. But we also have seen where, working with RICO, that things like LIBOR needing addendums to be created for those, document assemblies being used for that, or potentially creating brand new contracts with some of this data set that's already been reviewed and extracted and mapping to a templated contract that's been drafted. So that's just a number of things that I wanted to highlight as part of the demo. I'll get back into the presentation now, and Sean, hand it back over to you.
Yeah, sure. So we have a question, Michael. So someone is asking, how can one search for a contract by supplier name, for example, Dell, Microsoft, PCL, etc.? So that's within Heretik. And I think that if I could take a stab at it, the best part about Heretik from my perspective, and having worked in the tool and having my team run pilot projects in the tool as well, that Heretik does a tremendous amount of the heavy lifting for you. So when you input contracts into Heretik, it automatically extracts, as Michael was showing, the supplier name, address, start date of the contract, etc. All of that information is automatically extracted and put into a structured data format for you. So you get those, as Michael was showing, those essentially what looks like an Excel within Relativity, showing you all of those different data points as you're looking at the contract. So this isn't even something you would need to do. For the purposes of searching for it, you can simply search within the field, both with either in the contract in Heretik Viewer, like Michael was showing, with a regular expression if you wanted to, or you can just search in the results field within the Heretik dashboard. Just for looking for Dell, Microsoft, PCL, whomever you wanted to search for, you could search within that field. And I think that's right. Yes, Michael?
Yeah, you nailed it. Thanks, Sean.
I just like to make sure that I still remember what I'm doing. That's all. So if there are any other questions about Heretik and how it works, please feel free to submit them to the Q&A. We can always jump back into the Heretik platform when we get to the Q&A portion of the presentation. If there's any specific things anyone would like to see, like if you'd like Michael to work through the dashboard again, if you'd like to get a better understanding of where RICO Review Services gets involved, if it even has to get involved. This isn't something you necessarily need to use Review Services for. It would take that workload off your plate. But if you wanted to do this internally as part of a corporation in their legal department, as part of the legal department of a municipality, or you wanted to bring this in-house at a law firm so you can do this work for your clients, that is definitely something that we can completely support and assist you with. So it's not limited to just having RICO do it. And I just want to be very, very clear about that. So if you do have some specific questions, please ask them. You know, we're more than happy to get a little bit deeper into this as needed. So moving on through the presentation, next is litigation readiness. So as Michael was showing in the demo of Heretik, there's tremendous value in being able to, one, through the, oh, Michael, I forget what it's called. It's just gone right out of my head. Essentially the document, the amalgamator, where you can take the notification clauses and you can import them into a Word document for the purposes of notifying.
Yeah, just called document assembly.
Right, document assembly. So for the purposes of litigation readiness, especially around contractual disputes, Heretik and Relativity are incredibly valuable. One, Heretik, as I said, can do a lot of that heavy lifting. Through the use of document assembly, you can ensure that not only have your clients identified all the requirements for notification under their contracts via the automatic extraction through Heretik, but you can also ensure that they have produced the required notification letters. And Heretik can assist you in doing that by pulling the exact language from the contract, word for word, and putting it into a document that can go out to the contractees. In addition to that, for the purposes of litigation, Heretik creates a case for you within Relativity. So we would very easily be able to break apart different contracts for different cases or different expectations of litigation that's coming down the road. You can have one centralized database of all of the contracts your corporation or your client has, and then you can have separate cases that are specific to a particular litigation matter. And because Heretik lives within Relativity, we can take all of the work that's been done within the contractual analysis portion of Heretik within Relativity and move that information over to Relativity for the purposes of conducting, for example, an active learning document review. And active learning is Relativity's proprietary artificial intelligence tool that utilizes training by lawyers to identify documents that are likely relevant. So for example, if you wanted to find all of the communications around negotiation of a particular clause in the contract and what was the parties' meeting of the minds on a particular issue, we would be able to take the extracted work from Heretik, import it into Relativity, and start looking for all of those conversations that might exist around that particular clause. The usefulness and the power around analytics and active learning, for example, means that you're not doing keyword searches. You're not hunting and pecking within your data set. You're using conceptual analytics. and the information pulled from Heretik to better inform an AI-based review. So it's a significant time savings, cost savings, as well as a dramatic increase in accuracy and consistency in coding. So from a litigation perspective, if you think something's coming down the road, getting your contracts into Heretik, collecting data from individuals who were involved in the negotiation of the contract, and digging down a little bit to see what your risk actually is something that can be accomplished quickly and very effectively within these tools. It takes what used to be a very manual, time-consuming, expensive process that was riddled with inaccuracies. For every lawyer on the call who's ever articled and done any M&A work, where you would be copying and pasting from one contract into an Excel, like the number of times that you made a mistake or you copied something twice. I certainly did it when I was articling because it's usually something that happened at 4 o'clock in the morning. So in those instances, having a tool like Heretik can really assist in mitigating risk, increasing accuracy, and decreasing cost. So back to litigation readiness. Utilizing the combination of these tools allows you, as I said, to create cases in relativity for each contractual dispute. And both Heretik and RICO's contract review services, as well as RICO's legal document review services, are fully scalable. Heretik and relativity can be used on any size case. The active learning and AI components of both of these tools can be used on any size of case. And you can engage with RICO's review and contract review and document review services or not, and we can fully support you in either path that you choose to take. So I have another question now, another poll. As we work together to emerge from this crisis, oh, and I see there's a little, See, now the unfortunate part about Ready Talk, everyone, is that sometimes it sort of squishes stuff together and we sort of lose some words. So just give me 1 second. I'm just going to go to what that question is in another, okay. So as we work together to emerge from this crisis, will a deeper understanding of your contractual relationships become more important? So again, moving from kind of where we are now to, where contracts are diffuse and they're sort of like a secondary thought, is there going to be a significant shift so that you're going to want to have all of those to get a deeper understanding of those relationships? And I'll give everyone maybe 30 seconds or so, 30, 45 seconds to just get their answers in. Okay, so just going to close the poll here, and okay, wow, so that's, yeah. So everyone who answered the poll said yes, that the crisis is going to force a deeper understanding of contractual relationships going forward. So I think that this isn't surprising, especially as from a contractual perspective, it's, as I said, from a business perspective, the executed contract is not necessarily something that is always top of mind with anyone who's working in business. It's usually something that is executed at the beginning of a relationship and then isn't really thought about again until it comes time for it to be renegotiated and re-executed. So this isn't surprising given the current crisis. So what is contracting in the future going to look like? Essentially from right now, as we move through COVID and come out of it and sort of reshape our understanding of relationships in business. So from our perspective, we believe that the centralization of contracts is going to become incredibly important. The indication that I've had from all of you who participated in the polls during this webinar, and thank you very much again, I think you share the same feeling as me, that having your contract centralized, utilizing a tool like Heretik and RICO's contract review services to make it easier for you to draft, amend, as Michael demonstrated, compare your contracts in real time can be of significant benefit to a corporation as you're assessing risk and liability as we move through this and get out of this crisis. Monitoring liabilities and risk in real time is also going to become incredibly important. And knowing where you stand on all of your contracts. As Michael was demonstrating, if there's a force majeure provision, does it require notification? If there's a termination provision, what are the liquidated damages, for example, that are associated with termination of the contract before the end date? All of these bits and pieces, once they're together in one centralized location where you can access them whenever you want and do whatever analysis and more work that you want to do, is going to be significantly empowering. I certainly think so. And when it comes to getting a better understanding of those contracts that maybe corporate legal hasn't seen in 6 years because they've been living in someone's drawer outside of Saskatoon or outside of Calgary, or it's in the drawer in Vancouver. Like, it could be anywhere. But this event has forced us to recognize that there is tremendous value in getting all of your binding agreements into one location, and being able to monitor them as best as possible. So I just want to have a look here at what our questions are. It seems that we have some more. Okay, so the first question we have, if many of our contracts are in paper format, how do we get these contracts into Heretik with RICO for review? Will there be problems if the documents are older and not great printouts? This is a great question, and certainly something that I'm sure many of you who have a lot of paper contracts are concerned about. So the answer is that all of your paper documents can be collected and can be scanned, unitized, and have OCR run on them for the purposes of loading into Heretik. We have done this on a number of projects for our clients, including actually one that we did internally at RICO not very long ago. Exact same situation. Paper contracts, many, many pages long, not the best printout. Sometimes pages were a little bit askew or the paragraphs were too close. What we did was we scanned them all, brought them into our system, unitized them, and OCR'd them. Heretik has a fantastic OCR tool within it. So does Relativity. And we find that depending on the type of disruption, let's say, that there might be in the printout, one OCR tool might work better than the other. And we quality control them when we run them through each one of them to see which one works better. So long answer short is that scan them, load them into Heretik, get them into an electronic format, OCR them, etc., and then those documents will be ready for you to review just like any other electronic document. RICO Review Services will certainly provide quality control on those scans to make sure that what's there is properly displayed. Heretik as well has a built-in, and Michael, maybe you want to speak to this, because Heretik has a great built-in quality control I want to say workflow that identifies, let's say, issues within a document. And maybe you could speak to that for a minute or two.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And I think you covered the majority of it, but at Heretik, we built our own OCR in order to really control the imaging process as we're bringing contracts into our product. But as Sean mentioned, we do work with other OCRs. So Relativity or a third-party OCR can be leveraged in terms of scanning and importing the documents into Heretik. So it's good to have options when we're looking at the quality of documents in order to get the best version into Heretik, and that's where Sean's team and expertise can really help with that. But if we're able to leverage the Heretik OCR, we've got some control built in place. We have the near native image viewer, which I was showing as part of the demo. So the team that's reviewing the documents ultimately are looking at the same look and feel of what the PDF or the printout version of the documents did look like, and that ultimately helps with the review in order to be able to look at that text versus the extracted text.
Great, thanks so much, Michael. So I did want to take this opportunity to just mention that RICO is currently running a contractual risk analysis package. It's giving you 90 days free access to Relativity One by RICO, including access to Heretik. The first 100 contracts are free for analysis. So that includes the segmentation that Michael was talking about, the auto-extracting of information. The first 100 contracts, as I said, are free, and then there's a discounted per document rate thereafter once you get above 100. And this gives you, of course, access to the AI-based contract analysis tool powered by Heretik. So if this is something that you'd be interested in, please do get in touch with your sales representative at Rico, or you can certainly directly reach out to me. And my contact information is going to be right on this page. So I wanted to present that to everyone, and now it looks like we have another flow in of questions, which is fantastic. The next question is, how are contracts managed in Heretik that are internal supply vendors versus those that are external client contacts? So I'm guessing that the question is about, and correct this individual, you can certainly write in a clarification. So contracts managed that are internal supply vendors versus those that are external. And Michael, I'm not sure if you want to take this one. I'm not sure if Heretik would really. Yeah. So
I can take it. Sure, Sean.
Awesome.
So at Heretik, like we manage our own customer contracts with our product, and we extract key data points in order to know like which are the contracts that are expiring in the next 3 months within a couple clicks that we can filter on that. I think Rico does something similar with us, where there's internal documents that are being managed with the Heretik tool versus external contracts for individual client projects, and obviously all of those need to be kept separate for each individual external client that our clients are ultimately working on a project for. And so this is being managed within Relativity and Heretik in terms of the permissions and putting those documents into individual workspaces. So they're not, I guess, getting convoluted and tied together. They're keeping them separate in a sense.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And we would be able to segment all of your contracts into different workspaces, as well as have different permissions for you within those workspaces, as Michael was saying. So essentially, we can create a centralized database that has all of the internal company vendor contracts, and then a separate database, or even several separate databases, may be separated on a per client level, and that those databases could be accessed only by certain individuals. We can make sure that the access permissions are set on the individual sign-in level, not just overall to the corporation. So you can do whatever you'd want from a security and access perspective. Okay, so the next question we have is, how does the fee schedule work? Great question. Heretik analysis is priced on a per contract basis. So there's a set fee you pay for the contract. Outside of that, there are the standard fees that go along with hosting. If you look, however, at the risk analysis package, we're giving 90 days free hosting access to Relativity One. So essentially, if you have 100 contracts, the only thing you're going to pay for in this instance is the professional services that support getting all the information into Heretik, which is not a time-consuming process. In our experience, it takes about 2 hours or so of actual person time to get all of the data into Relativity One and then analyzed in Heretik, depending on the size of the data. But if it's about 100 contracts, you're looking at about 2 to 3 hours, plus the machine time associated with it, which is the running of analytics, the running of the Heretik analysis. But that's how that process works. So Heretik per contract, and then the professional services are per hour. If you were to engage us outside of the risk analysis package, then there's per gigabyte hosting fees. But usually what we do for the Heretik packages is that what we usually do for the contract analysis and Heretik review is we put together packages that are set fees for X number of contracts, X number of user accounts, et cetera, to make sure that the pricing is predictable, so that you're never going to get a bill from Rico that is like 4 times what you thought it was going to be. We make sure that it is all bundled for you, so you can go back to corporate management, finance management, to say we have a set price to do this work. That's what we're certainly trying to do with Rico right now with pricing. So we have 2 more questions that have come in. So Michael, this is probably a great question for you. Are there limits as to what Heretik can extract? What if my contracts are unique with lots of jargon?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Sean. So in terms of the limits, there are not limits to what Heretik can extract. The product is all completely customizable, and we start with a library of regular expressions to see if what is looking to be extract has automatically been done in the past and something that we can automatically do essentially out of the box. If we're not able to find a fit for that, and there is a lot of jargon in the contracts, we look for patterns, and this is really in combination with the RICO team and the services that RICO provides to see if a regular expression can be drafted in order to extract that information with the technology. And this is really helpful if we're looking to extract a data point hundreds or thousands of times in order to have the technology do it with a regular expression. Obviously, there's no limit to a data that can be extracted manually, and if it's only something that needs to be extracted a handful of times, it may be quicker to do that versus drafting a regular expression to extract automatically. But given that you have the combination of regular expressions that are all completely customizable or manual, there is no limit.
Great, thanks, Michael. And it looks we have one more question that's come in. And the question is, can Heretik be used as a long-term contract repository? Absolutely. There's no reason not to. In fact, Relativity and Heretik are incredibly flexible. So what you can do is you can load all of your data into Relativity 1 by RICO. We can run Heretik analysis across it. You can engage the review services to flag potential concern contracts, clauses that are of concern, and we can put together a full report for you, and then essentially put all of your data into cold storage within Relativity 1. So from a hosting perspective, you'd be paying next to nothing every month to keep all of your contracts, all of the Heretik analysis, all of the active learning if it's been done, all of the analytics, everything stays fully ready to go. And if you need to get your database back up, if you need to do some more analysis, if you have a litigation that's pending, or if you need to add in more contracts and conduct more analysis, we can bring all of that cold stored data right back up into Relativity 1 with Heretik in a matter of days. So it's a way to use Heretik as a repository, keep all of the analysis, keep everything together, but having to pay very, very little a month in order to do that. So there's that scalability and flexibility that we're trying to deliver here through the way that we've structured the cost around Heretik, making it as predictable as possible, and in instances where you don't need to use it actively, making it as inexpensive as possible to keep all of that work, all of that analysis, and all of that data in one centralized location. Okay, are there any other questions that we can answer? We're certainly happy to do it. Is there anything else anyone would like to see in the demo? Is there anything specific you'd like Michael to walk through in the demo while you're all here and while we have Michael here? Okay. Well, I think that will be the end then. Thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate the questions. Thank you so much for participating in the polls. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or to your RICO representative. We certainly will be following up with all of you after the webinar to provide you links to this recorded webinar as well as some additional information. So thank you again very, very much. Thank you very much, Michael, for joining us here and for doing the demo. And I hope you all have a great rest of your week. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.